and welcome to New Wave Global. You're watching Unraveled with Marvi Sirmed. It has been over a week since the chilling terrorist attack in Baisaran Valley near Pahalgam in India-administered Jammu and Kashmir, where 26 civilians, most of them Hindu tourists, were brutally gunned down on April 22nd. The attackers disappeared into the forested terrain, leaving behind fear, rage, and barrage of geopolitical fallout. India was swift in pointing fingers at Pakistan, citing what it calls a cross-border terror operation. Within the first couple of days after the attack, India suspended the Indus water treaty, shut down the Atari-Wagah border, revoked visas for Pakistani nationals, expelled Pakistani diplomats, and called back its own from Pakistan. And yesterday, we are recording this on April the 30th. So yesterday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi gave the military a carte blanche to determine a response. Pakistan, on the other hand, unequivocally rejected the allegations outright, calling it a false flag operation by India itself in retaliation for India's unilateral action of Indus Water Treaty, suspension of Indus Water Treaty, and other actions, Pakistan closed its airspace to Indian aircrafts, suspended its visa services, and pulled out of the Simla Agreement. Symbolic, yes, but provocative nonetheless. Islamabad also claimed to have intelligence suggesting, citing last night's presser by Pakistan's Minister for Interior, who claimed to have intelligence suggesting that India is preparing for imminent military action. Meanwhile, over half of the tourist destinations in Kashmir, Indian-administered Kashmir, have been closed amid fears of another attack, and the entire region remains on high alert. The war drums are beating again, loud, relentless, and familiar. But here's the question we must ask beyond the rhetoric, uh, beyond this xenophobia, beyond the jingoism, which is prevailing in our times. What do we really know about the Pahalgam attack? In this episode, we strip away the slogans and headlines to examine the sequence of events before, during, and after the attack. How did the terrorists pull it off? Could it have been prevented? Could lives have been saved? And why was Pakistan blamed almost immediately, without an investigation, without forensics, without clarity? Joining me today is Praveen Swami, one of the most respected journalists on South Asian security affairs. Together, we are going to do what journalists are meant to do: probe, question, and investigate with clarity, not dogma, with facts, not fury. Let's say thank you very much, Praveen, for joining us and giving your precious time to.
Thank you very much for having me here again, Marvi. It's always a pleasure. And thank you to everyone who's listening.
Thanks. And so let's start at the beginning. The attackers struck around midday, I believe, in Baisaran
Yes.
Valley. And this is an area, by the way, for the viewers, was, gathering from Indian media. I have never been to that area. So whatever my information is sourced from the Indian media. It's an area recently reopened to tourists without informing the security forces. Now, I don't know if that is possible or not. Praveen is going to inform us about this. But, armed with assault rifles, the terrorists came and they gunned down unarmed civilians, mostly Hindu tourists, and then they vanished into thin air in the dense terrain. No immediate intelligence warnings, no swift counter response, and to this day, I don't think there are any arrests of culprits. So, Praveen, based on what we know so far, what does this tell us about the the operational capacity of these militants, and perhaps more worryingly about the vulnerabilities in India's internal security architecture.
So first, I mean, just to bring readers up or viewers up on Baisaran, it's a Medan, it's a mountain Medan, as those of you who've traveled in Kashmir or other mountainous areas will know. The Himalayas have a lot of beautiful big meadows surrounded by mountains. And Baisaran is one of them. It's about, if you're very fit and young, which I'm not, it's about hours walk from Pahalgam, maybe a little longer if you're older. And there's no, there were plans to build a road there at one point, but
Hmm.
because of environmental concerns and other things, that road never got built. But it's still very, very popular with tourists as a place to go and have tea, to do zip lining, whatever. And there's been a flood of tourists to Kashmir all this summer. It's seen record numbers of tourists, and you'd see similar gatherings of people at many other places in Kashmir at this time of the year. So yes, the police services and the intelligence, military have been saying, "Oh no, permission was taken from us." But no permission has been taken as such for any of these places, because it was expected that terrorists, whatever else they may do or not do, will not attack something that will directly hit ordinary Kashmiris who are dependent on tourism for their livelihoods. Now, notably, there haven't been big attacks on tourists before. Yes, Hindu pilgrims have been attacked. Hindus living in some villages have been attacked, but the tourism sector has been left alone. And and that's it's been considered that that's because it is so important for the livelihoods of Kashmiris, both rich Kashmiris who invest in tourism, but also poor people who, maybe just rent
Exactly.
out a pony or a horse, or, run a tea stall somewhere.
But I
Now,
believe, Praveen, the passengers were attacked in Riyasi a year ago, no?
pilgrims, bus passengers going
Mhm.
to a Hindu temple at Mata Vaishno Devi.
Yeah.
And we should also remember that there have been massacres of this scale and much larger, many in Kashmir and in adjoining Jammu.
Hmm.
I mean, it's a long list, but viewers who are interested can just look it up on Wiki or elsewhere. There are many of these lists where numbers of 30, 40, 50, even above 100 have not been uncommon. Now, for many years, we have not had those levels of violence.
Hmm.
And that's generally led people to believe that things were getting better. But
Hmm.
last year, the run up to the elections to the Jammu and Kashmir Legislative Assembly, there were a number of attacks on the Indian military uh, by terrorists who were extremely competent. Um, so, for example, they maintained a high degree of fire discipline, their tactics were excellent, their weaponry was state of the art. In many cases, even Indian special forces were drawn into ambushes
Hmm.
and killed. And that led to speculation that there was a new kind of battle hardened fighter sort of entering Kashmir who may have had experience earlier of combat in Afghanistan, who was definitely more hardened and skilled than people who had operated in earlier years. But these attacks were targeted at security forces. There were some incidents like the attack on Hindu pilgrims in Riyasi, which involved civilians. Another one on a tunnel construction works quite close to where this latest attack had happened.
Okay.
Uh, but no large scale massacres of civilians, no bombings of the kind we've seen before. So it
Hmm.
was felt they're trying to avoid anything that would disrupt, this very fragile Kashmiri economy that had begun to re-emerge.
Yeah.
Um, Now, the truth is, the evidence is right now very thin on the ground. So, what do we know? Let's start with that.
Yeah.
Uh, Many journalists, including me, got a message from something that calls itself the Resistance Front, or TRF, on
Okay.
a channel that has previously, a Telegram channel that has previously taken responsibility for attacks on the army, and sometimes, released body cam footage
Hmm.
of those attacks.
Yeah.
And this
But
claim of
from
responsibility.
it was from a group called Kashmir Resistance, no? In
No,
the
yes, there are several Telegram groups that broadly cater to this ecosphere,
Hmm.
and their names periodically change. But this was it. I mean, this was from channels that many of us have received these things from in the past. And
Okay.
it basically said this was done because, as you know, the laws in Kashmir have been changed. Outsiders have been allowed to purchase land, and though very few people have actually done so, this has created this language of settler colonialism taking place, a la Gaza or the West Bank.
Hmm.
And it's been a major theme of Islamist writing on Kashmir.
Hmm.
So it took responsibility for this. It said it had attacked settlers rather than tourists. And then a week later, there was another statement from a separate, newly formed TRF channel. The TRF never had an actual channel of its own.
Hmm.
But now it has one. And it said that, no, this message was sent in error. Maybe our computers were hacked and so on, but we had nothing to do with this. So this is one fact.
Hmm.
The
And how
second
many days after the attack they said they
week
backtracked?
passed. The initial attack response came almost immediately, as
Uh,
it often has in the past with these body cam footage and so on. The
hmm.
latest one came a couple of days back. Now, it's almost impossible to verify either claim. I'm just stating these as facts of thing without making any further extrapolation from it.
Hmm.
The second fact is that many of the witnesses there have identified three people. There are sketches,
Hmm.
and my visual sense is not very strong, but some people claim they can see a similarity between those three sketches
Hmm.
and a group of terrorists involved in the attack on the tunnel near Pahalgam, which took place last year. Uh,
Okay.
Now, again, that photograph is a matter of public record.
Hmm.
One of the people of those four was killed earlier in a firefight with Indian troops. Three
Hmm.
are still around, and some people say these match. But I should add that there are very conflicting witness accounts. There are some witnesses who say they saw six people, some who say
Hmm.
that they saw four. And as a journalist, I know that in traumatic situations of this kind, where there is chaos, people running, people shouting, screaming,
Hmm.
eyewitness testimony is often confused and not always
Yeah, yeah,
reliable.
yeah.
I'm not very surprised by that.
Hmm.
Um, the third thing we know for a fact is that in the past, the Lashkar-e-Taiba has been responsible for a lot of these
Hmm.
killings. In most of these cases, no evidence ever emerged that compellingly pinned the ground, but there
Hmm.
was pinned it on anyone. But there was, if you like, elusive evidence.
Hmm.
Elusive in the sense that the Chitti Singhpura massacre took place, in
After
which
Clinton.
36 Sikhs were killed on the eve of Bill Clinton's visit to India.
Yeah.
There were two sort of narratives on those killings. One was that it was an Indian false flag identification operation made to look made to make the Kashmiri freedom movement look bad for Clinton's visit. The others were that it was the Lashkar-e-Taiba, and the waters were muddied by the fact that five innocent people who had nothing to do with the Lashkar-e-Taiba at all were picked up and killed in cold blood by Indian troops. That was established by an Indian Central Bureau of Investigation
Hmm.
by itself. So that's not a contested fact. But
Hmm.
that really settled the question of who did the killings in the first place.
Hmm.
Two Pakistani nationals were eventually arrested in that case,
Hmm.
but they were both acquitted and sent back to Pakistan because there wasn't very much evidence. And the latest evidence in this came from David Headley, the man involved in the
Oh,
Bombay attacks,
yeah.
who said he had been told, and this is something he told American investigators, not Indians. He
Hmm.
repeated it to Indians later on, that
Hmm.
he had been told by Muzammil Bhatt, one of the important people in the Lashkar-e-Taiba hierarchy in Pakistan, that
Hmm.
the Lashkar had carried out the Chitti Singhpura killings. Now, as you can tell, in terms of evidence, there isn't a huge amount. And in
Hmm.
my view, the reason there isn't that evidence is because Pakistani authorities have very rarely pursued these cases with any seriousness. So, in the case of Pathankot, for example, DNA samples of four perpetrators were handed over to the Pakistani investigation team that came, along with their possible names and suspects, but we've never heard back on whether there was those four people or some other people, and if so, who those four people who they might be, what they might be connected to, who their bosses were. Even in the case of the Mumbai attacks, you have a similar record where many of the key perpetrators, even those, the FIA did an excellent investigation in Pakistan. It identified people, it identified their roles in the attack, but most of those people were never prosecuted, and those that were acquitted on technical grounds without the substantial evidence the FIA had gathered ever coming to court in the first place. So obviously, I, as a journalist, can't go to the Jaish-e-Mohammed's headquarters at Bhavalpur or the Lashkar-e-Taiba's headquarters and to conduct an interrogation of its leadership. Neither can you, for that matter, or anybody else. This is where law enforcement has to step in, and there, unfortunately, Pakistani law enforcement's role has been quite poor. Indian law enforcement hasn't done a great job. As I said, they bungled and made a mess of the Chetty Singhpura case. But on the other side, there seems to me to be a willful negligence. In this case, I hesitate to say what will emerge. People often talk of Mumbai or Pulwama as cases where there was substantial evidence, which is true. But these are very high profile cases, mostly with these massacres in rural areas or involving less privileged things or things that don't make it to the international headlines. There has been very poor investigation, and a case in which actual guilt of any party is established is the exception, not the rule. We have to hope in this case that some kind of truth will emerge. Having said that, I mean, experience has taught me to be a pessimist. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So for our viewers, in the days following the this horrible Pahalgam attack, over 2,000 people we hear have been rounded up by the Indian security forces, mostly young men labeled as OGWs, or what do you call, overground workers, right? So this is a term we hear often in Indian-administered Kashmir, but one that I think lacks legal definition, or so because it lacks legal definition, it also lacks due process safeguards. So these detentions, are touted as the as part of a massive crackdown, but so far the actual perpetrators of this attack, they remained largely unidentified
Right.
and unaccounted for, but except the three sketches that have been released. And we will talk about that in a moment. But Praveen, for now, from a counterinsurgency standpoint, do these sweeping arrests of OGWs serve a meaningful
No. In fact,
investigative purpose, or are we looking at a pattern where OGW become a
I
catch-all label and
right.
more performative than strategic?
I think it's performative. I think after all these situations, the security forces and the government rightly come under tremendous pressure to account for why there were no police there, why there was no protective action. Now,
Yeah.
objectively, I can also say that when you have 1 million tourists in a place, you're not going to be able to put police pickets and army posts at each of those places. That's absurd, any more than you can protect every street corner in Delhi and every office building. But this criticism is there, and I think unfortunately, police and the army react to it reflexively by staging this kind of theatrical spectacle that we are arresting a lot of people. Who are what? They may be people who, at one point in their youth, threw stones at police during the mass movements that took place in 2016 or earlier. There may be some kid who's been in trouble with drugs or something, or maybe his neighbors said something that he's a bad kid and involved with some group. But overwhelmingly, you will find out that these kids have been picked up, thrashed, and let loose a week or 10 days later. What's even more disturbing to me in this case is that there have been cases where the houses of alleged terrorists have been blown up by Indian security forces with no court order or proceedings. And this, despite the Supreme Court very recently telling all Indian state governments, not even in Kashmir, that this kind of bulldozer justice, where without a court proceeding and a crime being committed, that you go and bulldoze someone's house, is a form of collective punishment that should not be countenanced. I think, unfortunately, some people in the Indian security establishment are very bedazzled by the muscularity of Israel's response in Gaza and
Hmm.
don't realize that this kind of behavior is the perfect way to alienate and anger ordinary people.
Correct.
In village, I spoke to people who said that, fine, even if this guy is a terrorist, you blow up his house, you throw his family out. Why
Yeah,
should 15 houses around them suffer? What is their crime?
exactly.
So I think after this attack, there has been an outpouring of anger and upset among ordinary Kashmiris about what happened. Kashmiri politicians across the spectrum have condemned it. And I'm very sad to say that the actions of the security establishment is likely alienating people, especially young people, for absolutely no purpose apart from being legally and morally unjustifiable.
Yeah.
There's no way to justify this kind of behavior. I have to add, though, that as in our part of the world, this is the standard thing. I mean, it starts when a car is stolen, and who do? You catch the five boys sitting on the footpath and you torture them until they confess to 200 things. And it runs all the way up to these serious cases. So that's a serious structural problem in all our countries, which we, really need
Yeah.
to address. But yeah, what is happening is disgraceful.
And we see this all the time in other countries, including Pakistan also.
And
Um,
unfortunately,
uh,
you're seeing it in America now with this horrible case of immigration breaking into that Oklahoma lady's house. And,
yeah.
unfortunately, some police and military officials seem to think that the law is for other people, not for them. And I think that's a very dangerous
Very
situation.
dangerous, yeah, for the liberal democracy around the world. So now coming back to the sketches, the Indian authorities released sketches of three suspects, I believe, and they were identified as uh, Ali Bhai alias Talha. Another was as Asif Fauji and Adil Hussain Thokar. Uh, and the claim was that at least two of them are Pakistani nationals, but these sketches are reportedly, again reported by Indian media, are based on eyewitness accounts. Uh, since there were no CCTV cameras, or I don't think any one of them have been captured by any cameras, because when this attack happened, everyone was shocked and the people were being killed. No one was sane enough, in senses to take the pictures of the. So probably the pictures are or videos are not available. So eyewitness accounts have established the Baisaran murders, the terrorist faces. No forensic evidence has been presented yet. No arrests have been made of the culprits and the suspects. In addition to these OGWs, um, all of this remains untraceable. So I will ask
Yes.
Praveen, how much weight can we assign to these, identifications? Are we looking at solid investigative process, or is this a case of some hasty attributions and which are meant f- to fit a preset narrative?
Right. Um, so these names of these individuals have been in circulation for well over a year.
Oh,
And they come not just from police but from local shepherds and people living in the mountains in those areas. uh, Take it for what you're worth. Even if somebody is a Pakistani terrorist and he says his name is Talha, it
hmm,
does not tell me very much about who this Talha is, who he
hmm,
is connected to, what he's doing. um, in terms of evidence, I don't think the eyewitness identification is very useful, as I said, in these times of stress. And we've seen this not only in terrorism cases, but even bank robbery cases and even, sexual assaults and so on. That eyewitnesses who are under tremendous stress and fear sometimes don't identify the people they are looking at very
yeah,
clearly. So it's of limited value.
hmm,
Uh, Having said that, a couple of things. I know that there has been some quite systematic work in that area to gather evidence by the National Investigation Agency, which is a professional organization. I don't know what they found, and I'm quite glad against that, because there's this habit of, babbling things in the press, which sets off cycles
yeah,
own. And I don't think criminal investigators
hmm,
should discuss the ins and outs of what they found or not found. at this stage of the investigation.
Hmm.
Uh, the second factor is that this group is known to have been operating in an area called Adu, which is quite close to Pahalgam, a mountainous area, for over a year. Now, is this the group which actually carried it out? Did some other group come and do it? I mean, you look at the photograph and you look at these faces and you kind of think, well, maybe they're similar. Maybe they're similar is not telling me very much. More important is the question of what connections they have with the Lashkar-e-Taiba. I can
Hmm.
certainly say that given the past history, there is good reason to suspect.
Hmm.
But unlike Pulwama or unlike the Pathankot attack, uh,
Hmm.
there is nothing very substantial yet. I'd also like to highlight that in both those cases, and even in Mumbai, most importantly, Headley's evidence came what? Well over a year and a half after the attack had taken place. So
Hmm.
sometimes these things take a good deal of time.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the political tempo and the way things are going between the two countries after these attacks is not the climate in which you can tell a cop that, look, do your job thoroughly. We'd like to know the truth. Take your time and find out properly. This sort of crisis is acquiring a life of its own. And I think the reasons for that are quite deeply political rather than,
Hmm.
concerned with the evidence itself.
Yeah, that's true. But something bothers me about, I mean, there was such attack could not have happened without proper recce's and without proper, homework that the terrorists must have done for quite some time. So, but there was no intelligence warning about such a high profile target being at risk. And I mean, what does this say about the surveillance and human capabilities in
Well,
South?
they're clearly not very good, at least in this particular case.
Mm.
And I think one of the things that's been written about, commented about very often over the last year,
Mm.
um, is that the uh, sense of connection between some of the mountain communities, the Gujars and Bakarwals, who were
Mm.
always used to generate a lot of intelligence on where terrorists were roaming around and so on,
Mm.
has deteriorated because the Jammu and Kashmir police feels itself to some extent marginalized in the new political environment in the state. And that's one of the reasons why these groups have had a relatively easy run of it. Having
Mm.
said that, even at the best of times in the 90s and in the early 2000s, when intelligence was a lot better, it's not easy to operate in these mountains. Even if you're standing at the bottom of a 12, 13,000 foot mountain and somebody tells you, oh, there are three guys sitting at the top, you're going to spend 2 days getting up there. And the
Mm.
guys are going to be able to see you coming all the way.
Yeah.
Uh, and one of the other things that has happened is over the last couple of years, the terrorist groups,
Mm.
which previously used to come into villages, sometimes stay for lengths of time.
Mm.
The Lashkar-e-Taiba commander in charge of these operations, Sajid Jat,
Mm.
uh, is in fact married to a Kashmiri woman he came to know during his tenure as a division commander in South Kashmir. They have a child also. So they stayed for lengths of time. They were very embedded in the community. That's not true anymore. And when I speak to Gujars and Bakarwals, they often say that even if they want a sack of rice,
Mm.
they'll tell you that you leave it at this certain place and go away. And somebody else will be told to go to that certain place and then take it to a second place. And there'll be a number of cutouts in between them. They don't spend time in villages. They certainly are not having romantic relationships with anyone.
Mm.
So they've also learned from their mistakes of the past. Uh, they're there in much smaller numbers than they used to be.
Mm.
Um, what the motivation for this attack was is very hard to say. Uh, was it some kind of revenge for things that have been happening in Balochistan? Was it an effort to step up the stakes for the Modi government and show that, unless you start talking on Kashmir, we can step up the heat? I can come up with any number of hypotheses and theories sitting here. But that's another of the mysteries in all of this. What does, if the ISI is supporting these things, if the Pakistani military is supporting these things, what is the end game it seeks?
Yeah, to me, it doesn't make sense because at this point in time, uh, and especially when JD Vance, the Vice President of USA, was in India, why would Pakistani authorities do such a thing to bring negative attention to Pakistan?
Yeah, I
We
mean,
are already
hypothetically, Marvi,
red flagged by FATF and other things, so it just doesn't make.
hypothetically, I could turn that the other way around and say that they'd want to do it because Donald Trump has been relatively disinterested in South Asia. He's shown no concern or care for Pakistan's strategic position. He isn't putting his weight behind reining in the Taliban from, making trouble for Pakistan on its northern borders. And this is a message that, look, unless you get serious, things can get really bad here. So, like I said, I think
I would say, yeah.
you can speculatively make up any hypothesis. Uh,
Exactly. But to this hypothesis, I can turn around and say that in the
yes,
recent days and weeks, Donald Trump is being heard on the international platforms. I mean, on saying out loud good things about Pakistan. They have praised Pakistan for the some wanted terrorists were
yes, recently from Afghanistan.
from Afghanistan. So, why would Pakistan want to muddy that kind of a feeling? Pakistan would like to build on that feeling and would be framed as a state that fights terrorism rather than a state that is suspected of orchestrating terrorism. So,
And
and you are
if I
right.
can go
All
back,
these hypotheses can be, one after the other. We can.
and if I can go back and just to flesh this out for our viewers, I mean, even today, everybody knows that General Pervez Musharraf was having a dialogue with General Manmohan Singh. Then his successor, General Pervez Ashfaq Kiani, became chief of the Pakistan Army, and for some reason, Mumbai happened.
Hmm.
Now, I find it unbelievable that his intelligence services wouldn't have known, given the enormous planning and institutional effort that went into that. But if somebody asks me, well, what did General Kayani think he'd get out of it? Again, I can make up a list of 10 possibilities, but I don't have a very good answer because
Yeah.
neither.
Hmm. Yes.
So this is one of the things I think we should just be conscious about as journalists,
Yeah.
that some of this is in the realm of speculation. And when we write and talk about it, we can say that, look, these are facts that I know. And these are things that I conjecture or I speculate about based on my information. But there may be more than one, possibility here. And I
Yeah,
think
and
often,
we also know, Praveen, that there are hawks and more jingoist factions within these organizations who Pakistan thinks and claims that they have been able to tame a bit and have been put into cold storage so that they don't do anything of this sort. But there are elements within these organizations who think that who believe that Pakistan and India need to fight a final war, and
yes, yes.
and
And
they
some sort of apocalyptic war that will end with,
yeah.
uh,
So they are not going to pay any heed to what Pakistan says or what Indian government says or Pakistani government says, or they would like to go ahead. And in this kind of a scenario, both the governments, both the security forces need to be very cognizant of these factions. So coming back to the attackers, what I saw in the media, reports coming from Indian media, they used M4s and AK-47s. Now, in Pakistan, we are quite familiar with AK-47s, thanks to Afghan jihad. It's not a small weapon to carry. And as you said that, they would have crossed on foot quite a distance, and I don't know how it is possible for them to cover that distance without being seen. But anyway, they executed coordinated attack and then escaped unscathed. How did they manage to melt away in a terrain that is supposedly under very tight security and surveillance. I mean, the attack has happened. Now they escaped, and attack kept for half an hour or so. And during that half an hour, the ghodawalas and the ponywalas, they uh, uh, rushed to, because they reportedly they knew about the attack through WhatsApp. They came to know about the attack through WhatsApp groups, and then they rushed to rescue the people, and they took the people from that location to the hospital. And according to some reports, they did two trips. They did the second, when the second trip, they were doing the second trip, the security forces, the rescue forces did not reach even then. So what
So
was
one of the heartening things about this, on the second part of your question,
Hmm.
is yes, the Godawalas and Poniwalas, and in fact, I should say the hotel staff, owners, staff in Pahalgam did an amazing job. There's no good hospital in Pahalgam itself. There is only a small, district health clinic, which doesn't have any surgical or any really good facilities or even a doctor. And people had to then ferry the victims all the way to Anantnag, which is 60, 70 kilometers over a busy road. And
Oh.
people did all that themselves. So, really a heartwarming effort.
Hmm.
And there is the one famous case of the Ghodawala, of course, who was a only local person killed there, who
Hmm.
said to have tried fighting with one of the terrorists to snatch away his gun. Uh,
Hmm.
Having said that, disappearing in this area, just like living in these areas, is not a big problem. I've trekked a lot in Kashmir. This is high altitude, dense forest. There's
Hmm.
not a lot of people around, except the occasional Gujjar Bakarwal with their flocks of buffaloes or goats and sheep. And uh, frankly, for a guy to put his weapon in some dhok or one of these hutments and
Hmm.
then just walk into the forest, there's no
Hmm.
way for a drone or a helicopter to say this guy is a terrorist and any
Yeah.
different from any of the other people
Hmm.
roaming around there. In none of the operations last year and this year in which the Indian Army personnel were killed, did they
Hmm.
succeed in locating any of these groups either. It's easy to melt away. It's easy to come and go. The key has always been information coming from the community, and that community, for whatever reason, does not feel very engaged or see any equities in cooperating with the Indian state. There's
Hmm.
been a lot of resentments among the Gujar community in particular
Hmm.
about reservations, which they feel they have lost out on, about their political representation, which they feel they have
Hmm.
lost on under this setup. And I think some of that is showing up in this hands-off attitude that why should I get myself
Yeah.
involved in these things. I think the chance that, for all this drone flying and helicopter flying and looking around, the
Hmm.
chance that anybody will be found in the short term is very low.
Hmm.
For example, from this particular area to walk into Vadwan in Jammu is maybe 2 days walk if you're reasonably fit. To walk all the way back to Pakistan is 4 or 5 days. You can do it if you push yourself a little, and all over mountain line. We sometimes I think of these mountains as some impassable barrier or Netherland. But all these used to be routes that people would traverse on foot all the time on the road
Yeah.
between Lahore and Srinagar. So there are many, many paths and passes through the mountains to get where you're going without, drawing too much notice.
Hmm.
Especially if you walk around at night, there's going to be nobody looking really.
Yeah, but in a security, it's a very tight security, and also, Praveen, I read somewhere that from that location where this terrorist attack happened, the closest army base camp is 3.5, 4 mile.
Yeah, 5, 6 kilometers. It's a company outpost of one of the counterinsurgency groups
Hmm.
and military army formations, the Rashtriya Rifles.
So what for
Um,
the security forces to reach the venue so late
I
that
mean, it's absolutely it's not setting a stellar example, and they will argue about who was responsible for it. Was it that company of the army? Even if they're driven from their location though and then made that walk up, as I said, it's an hour at the very least. It would have been a couple of hours before anyone made it there. It's the and this is the reality of the hilly parts of Kashmir. When we say that Kashmir is a high security zone,
Hmm.
Kashmir is like a bowl. It's literally like a katori with a flat middle and high mountains all around. And the bottom of that katori is indeed very well secured. There are good roads, there are urban habitations. There
Hmm.
it is very tight, and there would be a reaction to something happening.
Hmm.
Those mountains are a different world. And any military commander will also say, what will I do putting my troops on top of every mountain? As I told you, even if I get information that there's a guy over there, it's 2 days walk to get over there. The Americans, of course, in Afghanistan, in similar, high altitude situations, had vast resources. They could ferry their troops around by helicopter, and but these are not the kinds of resources we
Yeah,
have
but
to these
yeah,
situations.
I hear you, totally hear you, and I completely picture what you are saying. And it's very difficult. It's impossible for developing, nations like subcontinent. But whatever. I mean, India is a richer state than others, but still, I think it's not possible. But Praveen, this location was the busy tourist location, and securing it should have been, I mean, the basic decision that any security force would have taken.
That
Now,
is
the
true,
army,
but
and
there
then
was
in the,
yeah.
in such, in the event of such an attack, they don't have any choppers to land in emergency, or the terrain is such that even choppers can't land.
No, Chopper could have very happily landed there. I mean, there's plenty of. It's a vast Maidan,
Hmm.
absolutely vast. So there wouldn't have been any problems.
Hmm.
But I say this with some hesitation, but helicopters are for VIPs in our part of the world. They're
Oh,
not for anyone else.
okay.
And that is the sad truth of it.
Hmm.
Uh, the police don't even have, helicopters of their own. In America, somebody falls sick, they will take you to hospital in a helicopter.
Hmm.
Here, you will be stuck in traffic behind 29 other vehicles. In fact, even in this evacuation effort by the local people, getting taxis and so on, traffic jams piled up on that route, and some people may have passed away or ended up even more injured simply because they were stuck on the road with no basic medical assistance even. But that's the harsh reality of all our tragedies. If you're not part of the elite with access to a helicopter, then really God help you in these situations.
Yeah, but if this is the situation and there cannot be no additional security measures or rescue measures can be instituted there, if that is the case, why the tourist site was opened at all? I mean, why Indian government? Because now the police of the state police is, reporting to the union government, I believe. Because
Yes,
yeah.
it's Jammu and Kashmir has no role in security matters. I've seen some ill-informed commentary in India itself saying that somehow Chief Minister Abdullah's government had something to do with this. It has no role in security any longer after 2019. So whatever the police, the central police, the army are all under New Delhi's control.
Hmm.
Uh, Having said that, I, I I don't think any clearance was given for anyone to be in any place. You'll see similar crowds of people in the Bangas Valley, in Gulmarg, in a bunch of other places in Kashmir. There've really been huge numbers of tourists going from the plains in this season. And it's not, I think like I said, consensus was that, oh, if people are going and spending money, it's
Hmm.
something the government welcomes because it lets it project normalcy, but it's also something local people deeply welcome because after many years of difficult times, it's the first good year of income
Yeah.
they've had. And like I said, richer Kashmiris who may own orchards or may own landed assets, tourism is not so important to them. But for the poorest in these regions, this is a really vital source of income. Um,
not at the cost of so many lives. I mean, which means, Praveen, what you are telling is more concerning, because this means then that the basic exercise of identifying the locations which are more vulnerable has not been done. And if it has been done, nothing else has been done
Well,
about it.
the effort in Kashmir has always been principally on protecting the cities,
Hmm.
right? Trying to make sure that no attacks taken place. And despite that, there have been various Fedayeen strikes in the past on hotels, on
Yeah.
commercial buildings, on security force complexes, in years where there was a far higher security presence than there is today. In the in the period from Kargil to 2003, when 4,000 people were dying every year. Um, uh, Even at that point, when there were troops everywhere, these things
Hmm.
happened, right? And I think one of the sad truths of our modern world and terrorism in the modern world is this can happen in Delhi tomorrow, or in Islamabad, or for that matter, in New Orleans or in Paris, or anywhere else. Striking an unprotected civilian target is not that difficult a thing to do, um, under any circumstances. And I have to say, I wonder, even if there had been 7 or 8 police personnel at one end of that Maidan,
Hmm.
and at the other end of the Maidan, somebody came and started firing,
Hmm.
would it really have made that much of a difference? I wonder. I don't have an answer to this question, but I wonder.
And it brings me, thank you. This is a segue to my next question. We are towards the end of our show. Uh, what do you think should be a sober, security-oriented response uh, be right
Look,
now?
I think India has a very genuine problem on the fact that terrorist groups like the Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed have not been completely wound out despite their demonstrated target operations in JNK. Leave aside uh, this particular attack. There have
Hmm.
been attacks taking place over a length of time.
Hmm.
But we've seen Talha Saeed, Hafiz Saeed's son, hold rallies on Kashmir Day and openly talk about, jihad. We've seen funerals for Pakistani terrorists killed on our side of the line of control, held on the other side, and posters being put up, announcing this. So these groups are clearly around.
Hmm.
The Jaish-e-Mohammed in Bahawalpur has bought more and more land. This is
Hmm.
not some, speculation. You can see it on Google Maps. You can see the complex growing, and so on and so forth. And I think India is very much entitled to say, look, you guys took some action while the FATF sword was hanging.
Hmm.
But since that FATF sword has gone, you seem to be backing off. By
Hmm.
way of context, last year, when things had still been tamped down, a total of 13 civilians were killed in
Hmm.
Jammu and Kashmir. Right,
Hmm.
that is less than half the people killed in this one attack. Civilians were killed in the whole year
Hmm.
last year.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So things have really been tamped down, and I think if you speak to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's
Hmm.
government, they'll tell you that that's because of the surgical strikes in 2016, the attacks across the LOC, or
Yeah.
their bombing in Balakot. I personally don't agree with that hypothesis. I think those attacks, yes, had some effect, but the FATF sword was the big thing that led General Bajwa
Hmm.
to change direction. Similarly, I think General Musharraf's concerns about the Pakistani economy after the Parliament House attack in 2001, 2002 led him to clamp down and shut off some of these groups, leading to a de-escalation in Kashmir.
Hmm.
And I, like many people, I wonder if the end of that FATF sword has led certain people in the Pakistani military establishment or the jihadi establishment to
Hmm.
feel emboldened. If that is the case, then we are in for more crisis. Now, I think if there's one thing 2019, that whole Balakot affair should have taught both Delhi and Islamabad, is that this is not a game.
Yeah.
uh, Things can get out of hand very, very quickly. I don't think India thought it would lose a combat jet. I
Hmm.
don't think Pakistan thought that India would be willing to escalate and fire rockets.
Hmm.
1 second, sorry. I don't think Pakistan thought events would go in the way they would. And I
Hmm.
think one of these days, one or both of these countries will discover themselves in much hotter water than they thought they would be in.
Hmm.
Um, Now, unfortunately, though, countries aren't only run by cold calculations, they're run by politicians with a constituency.
Hmm.
Uh, Prime Minister Narendra Modi on this side of the border cannot afford to look weak.
Yeah.
This macho image has been a big part of his this thing, but
Yeah.
neither can General Asim Munir or Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif
Hmm.
afford to look like they're willing to give up on Kashmir and
That's
forget about Balochistan. So there are some political stakes here.
hmm.
And unfortunately, I think in our publics, there is not very much of a sense of what a real war in with a nuclear overhang would look like.
Hmm.
This will not be 1971. This is something that will destroy the future of your grandchildren and great grandchildren and their great grandchildren. Both countries will be left without a single city. So I really think there is room here for the public to start understanding what the stakes are and to put pressure on their leadership to fix this problem. Unfortunately, I don't see that outside people like you who have decided not to stand for election, sadly, Marvi.
Okay. Now this, I think this is we should end here because Praveen is now going on a different tangent altogether. But thank you very much, Praveen, for helping us cut through the fog of war talk and this media frenzy that has been eating us out for last 1 week after this unfortunate attack. What happened in Pahalgam was a tragedy of innocent lives lost, of security lapses ignored, and of public trust shattered. But what is unfolding in its aftermath? Maybe even greater tragedy, a rush to escalate, to inflame, and politicize. Instead of answers, we are getting slogans. Instead of what should have been investigations, thorough, meticulous investigations, we are getting ultimatums from both sides. We must ask better questions. We must demand better governance, both in India and in Pakistan. And above all, we must reject the rising tide of jingoism, hysteria, and xenophobia that masquerades as patriotism in both countries. Our job as journalists is to pursue the truth, not to serve as the amplifiers of nationalism or vendetta. We will keep following this story closely, critically, and without fear or favor. Until next time, stay safe, stay skeptical, and stay unraveled. Have a good one.